I'm Freddy Villano. We're here with Pete Trewavas from Marillion with Bass Gear Magazine. And we're going to talk about Marillion's new album, An Hour Before It's Dark, and what went into some of Pete's handy bass work on this new record. And one of the things that popped out to me right away, as it usually does with good bass playing, is tone. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask you about if you have a particular philosophy about bass and its role within the context of a band like Marillion that has pretty well orchestrated arrangements, let's say. There's a lot going on. Yeah.
There is a lot going on. Yes, I do actually. And I mean, the first thing about Marillion is that I think we've grown, over the years. I mean, I've been in the band 40 years. So probably for the first couple of albums, I was kind of trying to prove myself and trying to show off more than I should have. And I think, one of the nice things about being signed when we were was that bands were still allowed to, be young bands and make mistakes on albums, and record companies were still interested in keeping them on the books.
Yeah.
They
don't develop artists anymore.
And I guess over the years, we've all got more comfortable with each other and more comfortable with, we still don't know how to write. I mean, we just do what we do. I mean, and sometimes one of the reasons why we have such orchestrated approach to music is because of the way we don't really write songs. We write little passages of music and we jam. That's the best way of us using our talents together is for us to jam. And, I mean, a good example, or an easy example would be the 5/4 section of Easter. Towards the end of the song Easter, it goes into a 5/4 thing. And the guitar is playing a little harmonic-y pattern. The keyboards are playing a set of chords which don't really match. I mean, they work within the within the confines of the notes not clashing. And I'm playing a different sort of bass line. I'm not playing a bass line that fits the chords, but they all work together.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mark's got the little pattern over the top as well. So you've instantly got four things going on, and it is like somebody arranging an orchestra. We don't try and arrange it. We just we listen to each other, and through our we've got a good sense of working together and how we work together and how we listen, how we play together. We've been doing it for a long time, so there's that communication thing going on,
right?
That kind of sixth sense thing going on musically that you get. So that's a lot of the time we arrange music like that. We don't really sit down at a piano and say, well, if you do that and I do that, and if the bass did that and what went down in fifths or fourths or whatever,
right.
That's not part of what we do. Probably because we're all kind of self-taught. Mm-hmm. We all know enough about musical theory now, but we're much more self-taught. And we know everything we've learned from listening to our favorite songs over the years.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think during the creative process, when you're writing, even if you do know theory, you kind of don't want to really think about that too much.
Exactly.
You want to
exactly. I mean, one of the things I think that serves me well is I was always more interested in creating myself than learning about what, I never wanted to learn anything. I had piano lessons at an early age. When I was about 6, my dad said, because I used to tinker around on my dad's piano, and he said, oh, we should get you lessons. And I had 6 lessons. I said, I don't want those. He said, well, that's how you learn to play, the piano. I said, I just want to do what I do, you know.
Yeah.
I wanted to just be able to pick out melodies from the songs in the charts. Or my dad used to listen to a lot of jazz, and you know, although I didn't understand any of it, I realized from an early age that I kind of understood music. I could break down music and listen to little things that I wanted to listen to. Like in particular, I could follow a sax line, or I could follow a section of a jazz orchestra and just listen to that, and you know, almost zoom and zone out of the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, so I'd work out what was going on and stuff like that. And you know, so wanting to do and learn music for myself, to benefit myself, rather than, you know, I didn't do it to be good at what I did. I did it because it just amused me, you know.
Uh-huh.
So I never really thought about trying to be a better player. I just, you know, I only got better because the things I wanted to play got more complicated.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, there's two kinds of musicians, right? I mean, I think there's musicians that are creative and, you know, in a band, and they create music, or there's musicians that are what I would call hired guns, you know, and they can probably play anything and read anything, and, you know, they get hired because of their particular expertise on any given instrument. And so and sometimes the two overlap and sometimes they don't, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to get better. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm
I would hope.
I mean, you just do.
Years.
I mean, you do, don't you?
Yeah.
And you learn more theory as you go along, because it just becomes part of the library. You know, what you need to know and what you have to know, and you know, as you work with producers and other people, and what you write becomes you know, you want your writing to become more complicated as well. So or sophisticated, I should say.
Uh-huh. Do you write?
I do. I mean, I'm more of an influencer, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So what I will do, for example, if there's something going on, say, I mean, there's a little bit on the new album, actually, which I don't know whether you've got a copy of it.
I do. I've been listening.
Okay, so there's a little thing called Only a Kiss, which is a little instrumental passage before Murder Machines. It sounds a bit like a spy thriller theme.
Yes.
And what happened was that Mark was playing these chords, and I thought they sounded a little bit like sort of Bond-esque, or, you know, John Barry, who wrote all that stuff, The Persuaders, he also wrote as well, a lot of TV themes, and James Bond theme as well, classic that famously. And so I just started playing a little melody over the top. And that's an example of what I do. But, you know, probably more effectively in the songs, when I'm coming up with bass lines, I'm a walking bass kind of bass line player, really. I got that from the jazz I used to listen to, but also McCartney. He was my first bass hero. And so everything always used to start with him. And then, of course, you know, I started listening to Yes and Genesis, and I went through a phase of listening to Alice Cooper, actually. Things like School's Out and $1 Billion Babies had some interesting bass lines.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, a host of other people as well. But you know, what I will do is I used to play clarinet in an orchestra as well. I used to play second clarinet, because I wasn't quite good enough to be a first clarinetist. And I found when I was reading the second clarinet parts, it's like, oh, this is really weird. This is, you know, notes and passing notes and things that I would be doing. I found I would be doing that I wasn't expecting to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of took that away. And so if I think of something that I think, oh, it'd be good if that happened here, rather than stop thinking, oh, I'll mention that to somebody to do that, I'll just start playing it on the bass, you know, or introduce it at some point on the bass.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the bass lines will get quite sort of convoluted or intricate in certain passages of Marillion's music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually makes some sense in terms of your style to me, to know that background about the clarinet, because there is something unconventional, I would say, to your playing that seems to seep in, and that explains that a bit in a way that I didn't know that. I was going to ask about your tone and when you go into making a record, do you dial in a particular tone that you'll use for the whole record, or do you change things up based on the song and the arrangement?
I probably change things up a little bit. I mean, my most of my sounds, in fact, all of my sounds really these days, come from a Digitech RP 1000 pedal board, which I've used for quite a few years. It's kind of old technology now, but I got away from pedals. I used to use Boss pedals, and I used to love Boss pedals in the old days.
Okay.
Especially the compressor sustainer, and I used to just like the simplification of the original choruses and the distortions that they had. I always used guitar effects. I wasn't interested in bass. I tried bass pedal effects in shops, and I just think that's not really doing what I want it to do. You know, it's a bit sound a bit too. Sometimes bass can sound too posh. And I know, you know, people probably strive for the perfect bass tone. I've never found it. And when I find bass to be a bit of an anomaly when it comes to recording, because all my favorite bass sounds, all my favorite tracks of bass, if you solo the bass, it doesn't sound like you really expect it to sound quite often.
Yeah.
Or you'll solo it and it'll be, that sounds quite ordinary, really. I mean, you can tell it's a well recorded sound, or not always, actually. Sometimes, not very big, or kind of even slightly sloppily played, where you think, oh, this is really good. And then you solo it, or you put it with the drums. It's a bit sloppy in there, in places, isn't it? But it adds to the atmosphere sometimes as well. But I mean, you know, these days you have the benefit of the in the box stuff you can do, and you can look at all the wave files and match everything up perfectly. So there's a lot more you can do with bass sounds. But the Digitech pedal board, getting back to that, I kind of took it and listened to a lot of the sort of sounds I was after, and I took a few favorites, and essentially I've got a rock sound. I do like a bit of grunge. I like a bit of grunt in there. So I like a little bit of distortion, whether that's valve or just overdrive on the gain channel, distortion from an amp, or maybe a little bit of distortion from a virtual pedal inside the Digitech. But I kind of use them sparingly unless I really want to go full on. You know, there's a song called Gaza, about Gaza and the plight there, and there's a really heavy bass riff in the middle of it. It was a thing that Ian and I were jamming away one day, and it just happened to stick with everyone, and everyone said, oh, we should definitely use that, and Mike found a place to put it in this song, and it's got a stupidly overdriven bass. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it gives you the atmosphere, you know. And I mean, you know, it's nice playing with those sounds because they'll sustain for days. And you know, you almost have to do nothing. You just look at the bass and it starts playing, you know. But most of the time, I want it to work with the song. You know, I want the notes to be where you've got to be able to feel them. You've got to be able to feel the punch of the bass with the bass drum. That's what I strive to get. And so if something's too overdriven, or something's just a bit too, I don't know, too posh or too polite, it might sound great on its own, but if it's not working, sometimes you just want a little bit of a muddy sound, or you just want a little bit more of the mid, where you would maybe take the mid out and have some nice pingy high end and lots of low, lovely bass. Those aren't always the tones that are going to push it through, you know.
Yeah.
So so I do that. I kind of, and depending on the song, I will, you know, I'll have a few stock sounds that I kind of go to, but I also with this album, I was kind of looking for something slightly different. I realized that a lot of this album's got an energy to it. This album, you know, particularly Be Hard on Yourself, particularly, and Murder Machines as well, kind of reminds me of, there's an energy that early Yes had. You know, when I first listened to early Yes, it's like, this is chaos. This could, you know, like Time in a Word, and the original album just called Yes. You know, there was something going on that you weren't quite understanding. You knew the music could just go anywhere at any time.
Yeah.
And the sounds were all cool and new. And Be Hard on Yourself kind of has that. And a lot of the album has that kind of energy to it. Although, you know, lyrically, it's about a lot of the things that are going on at the moment.
Yeah, I agree.
Or have been over the last few years.
Yeah.
Musically, there's more of an upbeat vibe. But so I was looking, you know, for a bit of a harder sound, I guess, in a few songs. But I mean, you know, there are moments in like Sierra Leone, or, you know, The Crow and the Nightingale, where you just want to, what I tend to do, I don't tend to change sounds. I tend to use my playing to change the sound.
Sure.
In a kind of Jeff Beck kind of way, you know. He will use the guitar to do what he wants to do, or just dial down on effects rather than changing the sound.
Yeah, or even change your hand.
With my fingers. Yeah. I'll change where I'm playing on the neck sometimes. So I'll maybe do that end whistle thing where you play with your thumb over the top of the fretboard, or, you know, play with my. I play with my fingers quite a lot. I'm not a technical finger player, because most of the time I have a pick. So I'll just hold the pick in one of my fingers and play with the other fingers, or a finger and a thumb in a kind of, I used to play finger picking guitar as well. So I'd sometimes use thumb and finger. And I used to think of that as cheating, you know, as I should be able to just play bass with my fingers like everybody else can. So I used to think I'm just kind of bluffing this and cheating a bit, but actually it's just kind of become what I do, and it's part of my style. So that's it.
Yeah, I'm not a purist.
I with it.
Many of my favorite bass players use a pick, so I'm not.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, picks are great, and I like playing with a pick. But what I meant by bluffing is when I'm using fingers, I tend to use a finger and a thumb.
Oh, okay.
I'm more accurate like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unique.
Or I use one finger fast as opposed to, you know, two fingers.
Yeah,
you know, I'm not the two finger guy.
There's even three finger guys, if you can believe.
Well, I know. Some of that triplet stuff is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
John Mayung and people.
Yeah. I watched some of there's a Marillion, a video on the website where you go over some of your gear, and I was going to ask you, you know, you had the Warwick and the double neck Rickenbacker. So I was, did you use predominantly one of those instruments for this new record, or?
Yes, I use all of the time, really. My go-to bass is the thumb bass. It's an original. It's before they started machine making the guitars. It was a hand built in the first couple of years of their factory changing over from Framus to Warwick and building basses. So it's it's a kind of late 84 thumb bass.
Oh wow.
And I've got two of them actually. They've both got different pickups in, so they have slightly different sounds. And then I recently went back to Warwick, and I'm an endorser with them again these days. So I've got a couple of the newer basses as well. But my old thumb bass is one particular one that I really like using. I've used it on a lot of Marillion albums. I've also used it on all of the Transatlantic albums as well.
Yeah, cool.
So it just has a lot of, you know, I tend to think of basses as having one sound, but actually the sound it has, I manipulate depending on how I'm playing it or what I'm putting it through. So,
Sure.
But it's just, I know I'll plug it in and I'll be happy with what I'm getting out of it, you know.
Yeah.
So that's good. The double neck Rickenbacker is it's a lovely looking instrument. It's a bit of a pig to play.
I imagine.
Particularly because it's an old one. It's a double neck from 1973.
Mm-hmm.
And it was made for the British Music Fair in 1973. And the 12-string was, I think they just used a 6-string neck and put 12 headstock, incorporated that with it. So it's almost impossible to play with 12 strings on, or it is for me with my fat bass player's fingers, you know. These days, the 12-string Rickenbackers are slightly wider necked.
Yeah.
But the bass section is lovely because although I used to play I used to have 2 Rickenbackers that I played in the original days of Marillion. They were monos, they were 4000s, and this 73 double neck is based on a 4001.
Okay.
So it's got that kind of old 4001 kind of sound to it.
Yeah. I noticed in that same video you had some Warwick amps behind you. I was wondering,
yes,
are you using those?
Yeah, I use those. Yeah, I use the WA 600.
Uh-huh.
And that's cool. It's got, you know, that I just have, you know, I have it on kind of one sound for me that works.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to have the compression in. It can work as a limiter as well if you dial down the compression, but I have it kind of halfway up. I find if you have it too high up, it kind of, the note pushes out towards the end where a note would normally fade. It will tend to get a bit too loud for me, and it's like that's starting to sound a bit superficial there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, compression is one of those things that I feel like bass players either love it or hate it. Like there's not much middle ground.
I like it when I don't really notice it. I just think I'm playing well.
But I know what you're saying. It can tend to squash a note, like
I really don't like that.
Yeah, in an unnatural way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, our sound man, we've had the same sound man for a long time now, and he's always like, take all that bloody compression off. You know, what are you doing adding? You don't need compression. Look at this room. You have compression. I'll have nothing to do with it. And of course, you know, we have in-ear monitors now as well. So
I was going to ask.
I never really get too much of a sense of the natural bass. I tend to run my rig quite loud these days. You know, I used to have it fairly quiet in the old days when I had monitors and stuff. There was no need for my rig to fill the stage. But these days, we don't have any sound on stage apart from, you know, we used to have sort of thousands of watts of amplification on stage, just just having monitors in, and that was you know, deafening. But these days we're all on in-ear monitors, and so we have to have a bit of amp sound, and we have to actually have some monitors facing the front row of the audience, because sometimes side fill, you know, or the arrays don't quite hit the front of the audience in the same way they used to.
Yeah, I often wonder, you know, like being a bass player myself, you know, I like to feel the bass and have that sense of air, and you don't get that with in-ears, you know.
No, not in no, you don't. No. And it's kind of harder. You if you're not careful, you overplay.
Yeah.
And the other thing, we rehearse with in-ears as well. And then when we get to having the sound man involved, he's like, what's that section where you're just not really playing? It's like, no, we're just playing quietly. No, he said, you're just stroking the strings. He said, I need some sound, you know, I've got to project this somehow. So you're going to have to play a bit louder than that. Because of course you get the whole, especially in your own room where you're happy with your sound, you can do all of that. And of course, when you get to a live show, you hear half of it because there's so much sound bouncing around anyway. It's like, oh, forget that then.
Do you have any secret weapon type stuff in your setup that wouldn't be totally obvious to, you know, somebody like myself, you know, just gleaning from, you know, research and whatnot? Like, is there anything that's within your, you know, your amps or your basses or your pickups or your pedals that would be like a secret sauce that
oh yeah, no, I don't have any of that. I don't have any kind of custom stuff. Yeah, I know some players have, like, you know, their setups are very different to the way I just have, but I tend to just use the 4x12 cabinet. So I use the 600, the WA 600 Warwick head. It's you can do a lot of stuff with it. It's a super head.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
And I used to have the 15 as well, but I found that I didn't need it and I didn't want it. I just wanted to, but I still, so we take the cabinet because I want the 4x12 to be, you know, pretty close to the top of my body. I want to feel it through, you know, through to my chest, really. And I want to be it to be in line with me, you know. And I mean, when I say I run it quite loud, I used to run it almost at nothing, you know. But I do run it louder than, it's probably still fairly quiet. I mean, it's nowhere near the 600, you know, it's nowhere near the range. I have quite a bit of drive on it, but we also take a clean DI from the bass as well. So the out front engineer has the amp, the pedal board, and the DI to play with.
Yeah, it seems to be the way the sound guys like that these days. Like, that seems to be the working model, is they like to be able to control the sound coming out of the PA and have less competition with on-stage volume.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I always say, because there was a time, I mean, I remember we used to be playing arenas. We don't play quite as many arenas these days, maybe one or two. But and I used to have this big stack. It was a Laney, and before that it was Peavy, and I used to, you know, run it and thinking I was doing great. And the first thing the sound engineer would do after he'd gone around the drums for a couple of hours, you know, tuning as sound engineers always used to do in the old days, he'd say, yeah, the bass sound, he said, turn it down a lot. He said, I can't do anything with it here. And so I always used to have to turn it down. So I ended up just not really. I just said, put it in the monitors and then when I started using a pedal board, I just used to monitor the pedal board for a few years. But now it's quite nice to have, especially with the in-ears, it's quite nice to have a little bit of air going around.
Yeah. Do you have any, do you work on, you know, when you're not touring or recording, do you have any practice regimen with the bass, or is it mostly geared towards songwriting?
I don't actually, but I'm of an age where I do now. I never used to. I mean, and also it's quite hard as well, because we were touring for a long time. We were doing stuff, flying around the world and stuff, and we'd never see our equipment. We'd only see it on stage. So we'd see it for about 2 hours a day, you know. So we and you know, we well, actually what we used to do was have very long sound checks, so that we could rehearse and then do the show. And sometimes sound checks were longer than the shows. We've stopped doing that now. We still care. We just rehearse a bit better. And yeah, I do. I have a bit of a regime, but also, I mean, for the last few months, I've been rehearsing transatlantic music as well, because
Okay.
I have a tour. I have conventions scheduled for Marillion this year, and the first one is in Poland in early April, and then straight after that, I'm flying to Pennsylvania, and I'm rehearsing with Transatlantic to do some shows with Transatlantic, and then both bands are on the cruise to the edge.
Oh, wow.
Both bands are doing two separate shows, so I'm learning 4 shows worth of music at the moment. So I'm actually doing a lot of playing.
I bet. Do you approach Transatlantic differently than you approach Marillion?
Yeah, I tend to. Yeah, because Transatlantic is a bit more of a show band. You know, we're all soloing at once, basically. Unless we really don't, you know, unless it's such a, I mean, there are the songs, obviously, and the song passages of the music, we obviously play a bit more. We tone it down a bit. Not always live, but we try to. And then, of course, we let it fly for the musical passages, and they get quite complicated because there's Neil writing stuff, there's Royner, and Neil's writing is quite complex sometimes, but it's usually melodic based, whereas Royner's is sometimes kind of scale based, not always the usual scales that I've learned. You know, sometimes it will be kind of whatever, some of those modes that I've probably never bothered to hear about.
Learn the names of.
Well, I watched a bit of Scott's bass lessons stuff, because he has a lot of free. He has a lot of free stuff there, and he was going on about the modes, and I thought, oh, I should get to know what these things are and what they're all about. And I basically worked out that I already used them all. I just didn't realize what the names were. You know, because just if you're playing runs, or you're playing walking bass, or you're connecting chords to different chord sections, the way I walk through melodically anyway, I've been using it all. I just didn't have names for it. You know, it's all there in my arsenal. You know, so but I was asked to play. There's a band called The Sea Within that had an album out, and the bass player is a guy called Jonas Reingold, who is a phenomenal bass player. He's in the Flower Kings. He was taught by the guy who used to play double bass in the Oscar Peterson trio.
Oh, wow.
And so he was kind of like a child prodigy, and he's an unbelievable bass player. He really is. And so there were passages of playing on that album, and what happened is that he was on tour with Steve Hackett, and they had their first show booked in at a festival called Lorelei in Germany, and he asked if I would play bass for that particular show. So I learnt the album, and I realized that there were bits that I was going to have to really brush up on my playing, because he was doing kind of little Jacko type runs.
Oh, yeah, wow.
You know, up the dusty end of the bass. And so I thought, right, I'm going to have to sort of really learn how to do this. So I watched a few of Scott's bass lessons things about, you know, the finger picking styles and the scales and things, and got to grips with it a bit more.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, I do, you know. Having said I don't consider it important. What I consider important is if I know what I want to play and I can play it. That's really what drives me. Not being able to impress everybody with my amazing playing. That never did drive me. It was about being able to play and, you know, be in a band, really.
Yeah, context. It's all about context.
Sure.
You know, it's funny you just used the expression "dusty end," and I heard I heard that for the first
Yeah.
time a couple of months ago from Colin Hodgkinson. And
There you go.
I had to ask him what that meant. And he explained to me the difference between the dusty end and the farmer's end.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it's our producer. Funnily enough, Marillion's producer, Mike Hunter, is also he claims not to be. He said, "Oh, I'm not really a bass player," but he is. He's a very good bass player himself. So he and I, he quite often says, "Oh yeah, that bit where you're up the dusty end, I really like that." And, so it's lucky. It's lucky having a producer who's a bass player, actually, because I always get full attention on that section of the music, which is nice.
Cool. I think we're at time.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been great. And
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
So I'll just say once again, Pete Trewavas from Marillion. They have a new album out, An Hour Before It's Dark. And this is for Bass Gear Magazine. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.